Iraq has denounced the United States for a drone strike on its capital, Baghdad. A spokesperson for Iraq's Prime Minister said the attack was pushing his government to end the mission of the US-led coalition in the country, describing the mission as a source of instability. The strike killed 3 members of a powerful Iran-backed militia, including its leader, and was conducted without prior consultation with Iraqi authorities. The US believes the group, Kataib Hezbollah, carried out the drone strike in Jordan that claimed the lives of 3 US soldiers. Here's US National Security spokesman John Kirby responding to Iraqi protests.
I would tell you that we fully respect Iraq's sovereignty. And our troops are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government to continue to advise and assist their military, their security forces, as they continue to battle against a still viable ISIS threat. But look, if there were no attacks on our troops, who are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government, there would be no need for retaliatory strikes.
Well, the United States has frequently targeted Iran-backed groups that it says are behind missile and drone strikes on its troops in Iraq and Syria. The US has nearly 900 troops in Syria and 2,500 in Iraq as part of an international coalition against the so-called Islamic State group. Its bases have come under sporadic assault from Iran-backed militias for years, but the attacks have increased since the Hamas terror attacks of October 7. Let's consider this then with Bradley Bowman, who's Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. He served more than 15 years on active duty as a US Army officer. He joins us from Washington. Welcome back to DW. So the US is in Iraq, supposedly helping to stabilise the country and help fight this IS insurgency. How does that square with attacking their capital city with drones?
I think it squares quite easily. I think Admiral Kirby has it exactly right, and it's factually unassailable. The U.S. military is there in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq, primarily for the purpose of keeping the ISIS caliphate defeated. When you invite someone into your home, you have a responsibility to protect them. The Iraqi government has consistently failed to do so. And as you and I have discussed before, the number's now 168, more than 168 attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria combined, with roughly half of those happening in Iraq. And the U.S. has responded about 10 to 12 times. And so the U.S., unlike the Islamic Republic of Iran, supports Iraqi sovereignty. But there's also something we also support, and that is our troops not getting killed and blown up. So this is a repeated playbook from Iran. They encourage their proxies to attack our forces. They know sooner or later, despite our restraint, we'll respond. And when we respond, you get protests and pushes for the U.S. military to depart, which would be a gift to Iran, increasing its power and control over Baghdad, increase the chances we'll see a resurgence of the ISIS caliphate.
So what do you think, then, are the chances of the U.S. remaining in Iraq with this having happened?
I think this will increase already underway momentum in some quarters in Baghdad to push U.S. forces out. And a process is underway. America is participating, as you'd expect us to. And we'll see what the sovereign government of Baghdad, heavily influenced by the Islamic Republic of Iran, decides. And then I suspect the Biden administration will respect that. It'd be interesting if they asked all the Quds Force members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to leave. Something tells me they wouldn't leave. But if they ask the United States to leave, I think the Biden administration will honor that and will leave. And that really demonstrates the fundamental difference in the two approaches.
It does, and it's interesting, and obviously we'll see how it plays out. But how does that therefore then play into wider US interest in the region? It's one thing saying, all right, we'll take a bat and ball home, but then is that necessarily in America's interests to leave Iraq?
No, I think it would be directly contrary to American interests. I think we have an interest in keeping the ISIS caliphate defeated. The caliphate's defeated, the terrorist organization is not, and the ideology, my goodness, certainly is not. And if we leave, as I just said, you're going to have further undermining of Iraqi sovereignty. You're going to have growing concern among Sunni Iraqis about Shiite predominance in Baghdad, which will create fertile radicalization recruiting ground for ISIS, increase the chances of its resurgence. And just like after the U.S., we've seen this movie before. The U.S. military withdrew in 2011, and it catalyzed a sequence of events that forced us to return in 2014 once you had the ISIS caliphate on the march. So, sometimes it's good to look at the prequel because you know what the sequel is going to be.
Okay. And so we'll set that to one side and try and look at the sort of how we should regard the presence of these people on Iraqi soil, because you have Iraq and the US supposedly on friendly terms, yet Iraq appears, either knowingly or not, to be harbouring these people on its territory. The whole thing just looks ambiguous.
Ambiguous, sir, is a polite word. It's an absolute mess. Iraq is a chessboard for the competition between Iran and the United States. There's longstanding Shia-Sunni issues there. There's Persian-Arab issues there. Don't forget the Iran-Iraq war. Don't forget the Kurds in the north. Don't forget Turkey. It's an absolute mess. It's an absolute mess. And you know what? Who likes to take advantages of messes? It's terrorist organizations. We've seen that with Al-Qaeda. We've seen that with ISIS. We've seen that with others. And so the U.S. wants Iraq to be sovereign, capable, peaceful, and prosperous. And frankly, a lot of Americans have given their lives and didn't return home to their families in pursuit of that goal. We respect their sovereignty, but we also respect the well-being of our troops too. And they're really putting us in a tough dilemma by inviting someone into your home and then not protecting them while you're in your home.
It is tough, though, isn't it? Because the US calculus has to be about a retaliation now against the likelihood that US interests in the region will be badly affected at some point in the future. So we take our bat and ball home now, but in a year, 2 years' time, we're going to be back because all hell has broken loose.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You've put your finger on the dilemma, and that's what Iran loves. Iran loves this dilemma. It plays to their advantage, as I've said a couple times now, and it's real tough. Anyone who suggests this foreign policy stuff is easy and clear doesn't know what they're talking about. This is tough. We want a sovereign, stable Iraq. That's in the American interest. We don't want to undermine their sovereignty. We want a peaceful and independent and not a puppet regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's the key difference, as I've said already. But we are going to protect our troops. And anyone who's critical of this strike, I would ask them, if you've been hit in the face 168 times, how would you respond? What do you expect us to do? We can't leave our adversaries with the impression that they can kill our troops and have no consequences.
All right, we'll see how this plays out. For now, though, thank you so much for talking us through it. Bradley Bowman from the Centre on Military and Political Power.
Thank you.
For more on this, let's talk to Daniel Gerlach. He's an expert on the Middle East and the editor-in-chief of Zenith. That's a magazine focused on the region. Good to see you again, Daniel. I'd like to start by getting your reaction to the U.S. drone strike in Baghdad. What do you make of that?
I think this is detrimental to the stabilization of Iraq. And if we look what the government of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia Soudani was doing in the last couple of weeks, they have really tried to stabilize the country. They have removed the face of these commonly called pro-Iranian militias from the streets of Baghdad, their symbols, and also made sure that these militias move back to the outskirts. And striking in the middle of Baghdad contributes to a general feeling of insecurity. Many Iraqis feel now that they're back to what happened 10 years ago, to a phase of insecurity. And it's really important to see that Baghdad has become a safe place in the last couple of years. People are out on the streets, and though they know that these strikes are U.S. strikes against specific targets and not random terror attacks, I think this is really not a productive move. I wonder what the political calculation actually of the Biden administration with regard to this strike it was. Last week we have seen them strike on the outskirts at the Syrian-Iraqi border, and that was already quite a controversial thing to do. But striking in the middle of Baghdad is not contributing to the general feeling of security and stability.
Now, many of these militias that have been attacking U.S. interests in the region are backed by Iran. That's no secret. But is Tehran really controlling those militias, Daniel? Could it rein them in if it wanted to?
Look, Iran is controlling a major part of the spectrum of these groups. However, these groups have their own way of thinking and their own modus operandi. It's more like a general financial and ideological support to what the Iranians refer to as the axis of resistance. In particular, in Iraq, these groups call themselves part of the Islamic resistance, but they have a fairly clear target, which is fighting what they call the American occupation. And they even have legal representatives that contribute to the Iraqi debate and say, look, the Americans are here on no sound legal basis. And as long as they are here, we consider them an occupational force. Now, usually these groups, and Iran made sure actually they respect certain red lines, which is they strike, they intimidate, they provoke the Americans every now and then, but they make sure that there are no major American casualties. Now, what happened a few days ago in Jordan, when one of those militias attacked a U.S. base, led to the death of 3 American servicemen and a number of injured people, and that was, of course, forced the Americans to respond, and they did respond. However, I can only reiterate these strikes in the center of Baghdad. Mashtal is a neighborhood which is in the center of Baghdad, are just like leading to a feeling of insecurity, and the Iraqis, and it's not popular. You know, Iraqis understand that the government tries to stabilize the situation, tries to deal with Iran, and tries to counterbalance also Iranian influence there. But at the same time, it makes the government look complicit in American operations, and it's not a recognition of Iraqi sovereignty.
So if I understand you correctly there, Daniel, it sounds like you're saying that strike in Baghdad was counterproductive. You're a frequent traveler to the region. You just returned from Iraq a few weeks ago. What, in your opinion, should people in the West be aware of? What do you think that they often fail to understand about the region right now?
Look, I think in particular with the situation in Gaza and a global divide between the West and the so-called global South, and the Middle East is somewhere caught in between, we should bear in mind that Iraq is some sort of a cornerstone of the Middle East. We've seen in the last couple of years civil war, the emergence of insurgent groups such as the so-called Islamic State or Daesh. And whenever there's instability in Iraq, this has direct implications and a strong impact on the region, but also on the security here in Europe. I think Iraq, whatever deficient democracy it is, has a parliamentary democratic system with lots of deficiencies and lots of foreign players, including Iran, that are trying to project power and play a role. But however, we should recognize that the government in Iraq is trying to stabilize the situation and is aware that it needs international partners, international diplomatic partners that negotiate and that contribute to the dialogue in the region. But whenever Iraq gets destabilized, the whole Middle East is going down the river. And this is something we should have understood looking at what happened in the last 10 to 15 years in the region.
Daniel, thank you very much, as always. That was Middle East analyst Daniel Gerlach.
Thank you, Terry.